All right, welcome back everyone to the Green Circle Live, and we are here, and I believe by my count this is episode number 4. Very proud today because we get to showcase some great folks in the community, and it's always a big part of what we do here with Green Circle. So what I'm going to do is talk about quickly what we're here to talk about, and then we're going to introduce our panel. One of the things we see repeatedly through the process of social media and all sort of the new ways of IT, we talk about embracing DevOps methodologies and ways in which that comes into play for organizations. But outside of just talking about this big sort of religious view on what DevOps is, we want to dive in specifically around CICD, or continuous integration, continuous deployment. It's an important part of what I've seen in a lot of organizations and what we've got. So we've got some great folks on here today who can talk about that. So first I'll introduce Sylvia. So Sylvia, introduce yourself to the group and tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be deep in the CI/CD.
Sure. So I'm Sylvia Isler. I'm VP of Architecture here at VM Turbo, and the role involves the oversight of release engineering, the overall architecture of our system, and QA. So getting an idea, an almost real-time idea of what the overall quality of our software systems and features are is really near and dear to my heart. I come from the finance industry and the scientific world, and in both cases, constant evaluation of the code, what we're measuring, metrics, etc. is really important, and that's how I got into continuous delivery and continuous integration. Started on the continuous integration side, and now more interested in continuous delivery as well as continuous integration.
Excellent. Yeah, that's and that's the fun thing. It's not just they don't automatically happen at the same time. There's a real interesting way to approach it from either side, and it depends on how you've been exposed to it and what part of the organization you're in a lot of times. So and with that, of course, Kyle, I want to let you introduce yourself. Welcome to the Green Circle.
Thanks, Eric. Nice meeting you, Sylvia. So I'm Kyle Bassett. I have an independent consulting company called Orchestration in Toronto, but I also spend most of my time with a company called Revello Systems, who's breaking the mold in the world of nested virtualization and doing lots of cool stuff there. So I get to spend a lot of time with customers doing automation and diving into this world of CD. I guess your definition can change depending continuous delivery, continuous deployment, depending on how far you're willing to press the buttons. I've also got a lot of experience in the financial industry. Lucky enough to run a couple development teams back in the day when we were moving to open source, and a lot of these great tools were coming out that allowed us to do automated deployments and continuous integration before the word was really coined. Also get to do a lot of stuff around configuration management and automation, and you mentioned it earlier, DevOps. It's such a big square we can all fit into. But yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot from customers I've worked with and different clients and things like that. So looking forward to sharing some ideas with you guys.
Great. So that kind of gets us started. The big thing we always talk about is your introduction. We've all come from sort of storied backgrounds in the industry from various areas where we came in. Ironically enough, all three of us had backgrounds in sort of financial services. That tends to lead a lot of people into technology companies, I think, because we do so much very tech-oriented work inside a financial organization. Every time I do a presentation now, I talk about how we have to embrace this because your bank probably has more developers than your hypervisor vendor, and that's the truth of where we've come. You look at the amount of folks that are at JPMC and big firms like that, and Raymond James and other companies, RBC in Canada, and they're huge, because they've realized that technology drives a lot of their business, and that's always the back and forth, is like business driving technology or technology driving business, and it's a bit of both. So when we talk about CICD, when in your career did it suddenly become something that you realized was different, or did it happen and you embraced it, or did you bring it in? And maybe you've seen both sides of that. So Sylvia, why don't you talk about sort of your experience in becoming part of making CIDC part of your lifestyle?
So the first exposure I had to the need of CI was I was working at a small financial vendor, and we were selling to the big banks, and the SDLC process a lot of times at big banks is Byzantine, but at the core there's they want to see a traceability between the requirements, the design, and some proof that your software that you're delivering conforms to the design and the acceptance criteria. And there are in the one case there were literally dozens of use cases, and which spawned even dozens more test cases. How can a small company of 10 developers with no QA team, by the way, even prove that the software works? So we instituted a set of performance tests, functionality tests that were all automated, and then we needed a system that constantly evaluated the quality as we were making check-ins, multiple check-ins per day. So we looked around, started using obviously JUnit, Selenium, Hudson at the time, and that's what kept us above water with the project, and kept us delivering with quality and rapidity on this job. And I've been a proponent ever since. So I kind of stumbled into the need for it because of who we were delivering to and what we were delivering at the time. But I can't see another way to develop software. Otherwise, you're kind of flying blind and not knowing what you don't know. And I like problems. I like engineering problems. If something fails, I want to know as soon as possible, and that's what at least CI brings. And then
I really in trying to introduce that even in the operations side, and that was always the view I took of show the failure. Don't automatically walk into it thinking you've succeeded.
Right.
And how do you measure that success or failure? And that was a key thing.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle, you obviously have had an interesting history as well from a few different organizations, and now being independent. How did you sort of get started with CI and CD and these kind of practices?
Yeah, I would say we kind of grew into it. I guess back when I was managing development teams, a lot of people just wanted automated builds. So they just wanted a way to have a build happen a couple times a day and be able to give a little bit of feedback on whether it compiled and any kind of errors and things like that. That obviously grew into getting a little bit more mature in our version control systems and sharing code and just collaborating. I think it's an interesting paradigm which has kind of happened and I see it in a lot of the younger developers, is they want instant feedback. You mentioned it earlier, Sylvia, and I think that's different from when I grew up in IT. People would kind of hoard away their code till the end of the day or the end of the Friday, and then check it in and then hope for the best, right? Because they didn't really want to see that failure so many times. It was kind of a cultural thing. It was expensive to be able to check code in and do a build and see. So you always wanted to refine it and get it perfect. Mm-hmm. Whereas now we've done a lot of great things around automation, and I think the development movement is check in often. And I want my infrastructure team or my unit tests to be able to give me instant feedback, and I want to see myself go from 10% to 11 to 12 to 13 and up the stack. So I think that's where I started, was just around the build process. And I think the other real cultural shift is people realizing that in order to be successful with this, it really is on the development teams to put unit tests in their code. Without unit tests in your code, you can do all the builds you want. You're not really going to get the kind of feedback you need on how it integrates with the application. And to take it even further, how does it integrate with the billing system that's upstream, or a third-party API you're leveraging, things like that. So I think that it's a cultural change, but it's really enabled by the automation and the tools that are out there it's a lot easier and it's a lot less expensive to be able to run these tests. So it encourages us to run them more and run them often, really push the envelope.
Exactly, and now with distributed teams, if a developer is hoarding their code, it usually means nobody's waiting for it, and if nobody's waiting for it, they may not be collaborating enough or sharing enough with their colleagues. So now we have quite a distributed team, and people are committing often just because somebody's waiting on the other side to use an API that they've built or test something that they've built.
Yeah, that's a big thing, especially when we look at remotes, and version control kind of was the beginning of a lot of it for some folks, and some folks are literally still latching on to the concept of just embracing version control. So there's people at every different evolution in this process outside. I saw a funny graphic yesterday, which I'm sure everybody has seen at different points in time, and it says, like, in case of fire, git commit, git push, leave the building, and that's really the we all know what it means. But 5 years ago, let's say, Git was there, but maybe we didn't really understand that. Now I've got operations folks that at least are aware of the toolkit, and that's the next piece we want to talk about. So first we talk about how we embrace it as a practice.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the toolkit that enables the practice.
Right.
That's an interesting one. There's a lot of different ways to skin the proverbial cat, or at least commit code to the proverbial centralized repository of the cat. At this point, what are tools that you've used throughout, and used throughout the different application lifecycle management that you kind of have had good luck with? Sylvia, maybe if you want to talk about what we're using and perhaps even what you used in the past as well.
Sure. So one thing that when we started off, we had a collection of our dependencies in a zip file that people would download, and we had an AMP build system. Now, for a small development team, I mean, you could argue that's not even applicable for a small development team, but it certainly doesn't scale, right? So Maven is really a big part of what we do, and we use Sonatype OSS and Sonatype CLM to assess open source software risk in terms of security vulnerabilities, license risks, age and popularity, if you will, of the artifacts that we put in our software. So that's an essential part of the process. It's integrated in our nightly build, and it generates a report or alerts. And not that I look at it every day, but I look at it frequently to see if we have some of those risks creeping into our software. And what drives our build, our nightly build, is Jenkins, and that's it's the son of Hudson, and it's a good open source, freely available build system that can expand and sort of grow as an organization grows. So we first started off with a single instance of Jenkins, and now we've got master-slave configuration, we've got pipeline builds, and different stages can render the build unstable if certain conditions occur. So it's something that a small shop can use just to have build on commit for their project, or a larger organization like ourselves can use for all sorts of things, and building, spinning up integration tests, etc. So our Jenkins job integrates with the robot framework. So we run a bunch of integration tests as part of the nightly build. We don't do it during the day. We just do compile and unit tests on every commit. So there's and we're constantly looking for new ways to improve the tool set. So, but those are the basics that we use for now.
That's pretty cool too, because you see the as you said, it's a continuously evolving, set of tools that we use, and we discover them throughout. It's interesting you talked about Sonotype and identifying external, dependencies and risks. That's one that a lot of folks may free. And I, did Ruby on Rails stuff early on, and was helping out with the team when I was in the finance sector, and that was a big thing. Is we'd use all these third-party plugins, and we'd use other different tools, and then what you would find is those basically just were like 3 years since the last commit in some third-party project that you've got, and you build your entire system around it. Then you get the next version of whatever it is, and it was Rails in this case, and it wouldn't be backwards compatible with this plugin. So then it's version control mania, and it was a huge risk that we would only discover kind of once we were well down the road with coding, which is unfortunate.
Right.
So Kyle, you've come from a different spot as well. That we've talked through different levels of development. What are your sort of tools of choice as you've found over the years?
Yeah, I would say Sylvia stole some of my answers on those, which is a good thing. But I think back in one of the first tools that we used to start to implement was just something like Sonar, just to scan the code repository and start to give feedback on it. It was always a bit of a controversy going into anywhere and saying, hey, we're going to start pointing Sonar at your subversion system, because some people looked at it as we're going to start grading the developers and things like that. And it goes back to my comment of people wanting things perfect before they checked them in. So it was a real culture change. But that's a tool that I think is good. Just it starts to push the envelope depending on how much you're trying to change the culture of what you're doing. If you're moving to agile and things like that, I think you have to handle it the right way. It's not meant to fearmonger and things like that. It's meant to give good quality feedback to people. So I mean, that's a great open source tool. I think the toolkit that goes along with what Sylvia says, a lot of stuff I use is I've really fallen in love with Jenkins. I think you can do so many really cool things with it. I really push towards tools that have APIs, that have REST APIs. So we've used Jenkins in many projects. The nice part is you can trigger an external job and have it call the Jenkins API when it's finished to go and kick off the next job, which is a great thing, and you can really build the life cycle into that. Figuring out how to give that UI access to who and the controls and stuff can sometimes be challenging, and who's supposed to run those jobs and things, but you figure it out as you go, right? A lot of it's experimental. Maven is an amazing tool, another one on the market, open source, that really starts to harness and put this stuff together. Some other stuff around dependency management is usually a challenge as you start to grow your teams. Things like Nexus and Artifactory are great tools. I was actually reading about a new one on the open source called Nanny, which has an interesting name when it comes to dependency management, so I plan to read up some more on that one. But I'd say, like, where I really got to see this come together is when I made my first trip to the development team at Revelo, and they had the luxury of building a SaaS service right out of the gate, knowing that it's multi-tenancy. They're going to have to probably push 5-6 releases a week. It's much different than another company I know that started out with more of an on-prem solution and now is trying to move into a SaaS model, which is they've got distinct versions of their software. They don't have one stack, it's different versions. So the challenges aren't totally fair when you know what you're going to end up at the end, and having a leg up to be able to say, we know that we're going to have to live by these rules and be able to release software really fast, which forces you to build CI in your flow immediately, because you just can't afford to wait a week or two for someone to test a piece of software.
Right.
Other comments I have is, like, they're not really a tool, I would say, but learning how to toggle your features is massively important. And when you're doing continuous integration type things, it really allows you to still move forward with a feature that may be experimental. You can toggle it on for a certain customer or a certain test case, and you're not burdened by managing multiple trees in your source version, pushing things out. It really allows you to kind of manage that one beast and not have many of them out there and trying to get everything up to a certain version set with a big quarterly release or something like that. It introduces a lot of risk.
Yeah, I think that's really essential for velocity in terms of release frequency. Is keeping your stable components on and being able to turn off or on the experimental components is something that we just started to do recently, actually, and it works very well. And I also want to talk a bit more about Sonar. That also is a component of our build ecosystem as well. And in terms of what we use it for is not, as you say, a punishment mechanism for developers, but just keeping track of our unit test coverage. And people like to see that number continue to go up. And we have a central location where we can see overall what components are well covered. We have find bugs in there as well, which points out little coding boo-boos and things like that people in their spare time can go and pick up and fix. So Sonar is a really, and again, it's free, all free stuff that you can just sort of plug in, get started, and work with.
Nice. And you talk about it's the culture shift, and this is sort of the perfect lead into the third part of our conversation we want to talk about. Is we've now got the introduction, developing a practice, using tools to enable you to embrace that practice, and now the culture shift in being able to adopt it, continually embrace it, and evolve it as you go, especially when you're onboarding new folks. Now, typically, a lot of people that are just getting started with it, they're trying to look at it, and we talked about it, Sylvia, with small teams. You're passing around a zip file, and it seems to be good enough. And that's an unfortunate behavior that we've learned to live with. Whereas, like, well, this system isn't going to grow. We've only got 3 developers. There's no need for us to change the way we do things. But we even talk about to our internal folks, and we say, hey, look, the reality is you aren't going to retire from the company you're working for today. For whatever reason, we will shift around, and we need to think about the greater good for your capabilities and look at the forward shift towards CICD out in the world, just this idea of DevOps as a culture and embracing that. Mm-hmm. How do you shift or introduce a cultural change into a company of different sizes, and how did you find it went? And do you find there's, we talked about the Luddites, that's right. Always the classic thing, of people that will purposefully break things because they don't want them to succeed. Sylvia, did you find that the culture of introducing this was challenging, not only in existing people, but as you onboard new folks and making sure that they kind of map to the way that we want it to work?
It's interesting. I think in some ways the mindset and thinking of the culture was ahead of the technology of our build and delivery system. So people wanted to know whether the component that they introduced to the system was working well with the system. They want, hey, where's a build I can test? I want to run through some of my test cases. So we were kind of hearing it from all sides about the velocity and availability of new builds, of new delivered instances of our software. So, and at the same time, we wanted to increase our release frequency. So the mindset was there, and engineering had to follow with some solutions. And even if you are in the habit of manually building and delivering your software, there's an implicit pain point in that, because one or more humans are spinning cycles on something that could be easily automated. So I think we just had to get our heads together, and it was yet another problem to solve. But at least in our case, it was more like, hey, let's do this. This is going to be great.
Nice. Now, Kyle, you've got you've had both sides of exposure, and I'd be interested to find out your experiences in coming from the outside in and introducing, you've gone not only into, as you said, working with Ravello Systems and some other folks. When you come with your history and experience and you want to introduce this as a culture into an organization where you aren't going to be there every day, how do you find that they take that? Have you had good successes, and what challenges have you had in getting folks to adopt that?
Yeah, I think it's comes down to human nature in some cases, not so much about technology. And I've kind of I'm lucky in the fact that I've got to see a startup grow up from 4 years ago and embrace, like, that's what they knew right in. And I've also worked with a lot of large banks that it's popular, it's trendy, we should be doing this, let's get going on it. And then it's like, wow, how do we get started? We're not even set up in any way at all. I think it's a bit of a top-down methodology. Like, I think it's important to have that support from above. It's certainly transitions as time goes on, that the people, the developers, the people doing the work can certainly make it successful or not, but you really need someone who's willing to make a budget, maybe do some hard decisions around team alignment, build some virtual teams that are going to be able to really be successful rather than falling into the big compliance engine. A lot of this stuff we're talking about today, and it's all good, but it goes exactly against some of the tight idle practices that have put into some of these large financial banks. It's, having self-service environments and being able to provision an environment through a portal is so foreign, because there's no, necessarily request process with a person who approved it and someone did a capacity plan against it. So part of it is if you can get people to get their head around, we need to be able to give self-service to our environments. We need to be able to automate the infrastructure pieces. I'm a pretty big believer in taking it all on as much as you can. It's one thing to automate your build and deliver code to an existing environment. I really think we need to look at building the infrastructure with the whole CI process. We're looking at, people are talking about moving out of data centers into the cloud and being able to choose where they run their workload. If you can't build your infrastructure from scratch or from source, I mean, your application is only as good as it's going to be, especially if you're not doing microservices and things like this. You're relying on an operating system with certain configuration files, certain networking parameters, those type of things. The other stuff I would say is it's about willing to change and getting used to failing faster. So being okay with failure and watching it get better. Another thing I try to talk about is, like, measure everything you can and report on it and publish it out to the world. Don't keep it secret, because like Sylvia mentioned earlier, people do like to check in on these dashboards and see the percentages go up. And it doesn't have to go, up 10 points every time, but incremental change that's going in the right way is going to get you a lot of support. And when you get into those tough discussions and maybe you're over budget on a certain project, you can quickly say, well, look what we've done. We've learned to deliver code, this much faster. We can go through a new release for a customer in a week instead of 3 months. So you can start to measure that stuff and put a value to it, because there is a value to all this. It's not as easy to throw into a spreadsheet and be able to say, what does a build cost us? What does a bug cost us? These kind of things. So measuring that and showing and evangelizing it is super important. It gets people on the bus, and it gets you support when those budget cut meetings come. Maybe this new CI or DevOps movement, no one's been talking about it, doesn't have enough press, and it's an easy line item to cut. But you really need to be able to show the tangible things you're doing, and the nice part is you should be able to show them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. You don't have to wait 6 months to be able to say, this is worth it. You should be able to do it weekly.
Yeah, I think the measurement part is really important, and if there was any resistance in the process at all, it was around developers feeling like, hey, what are you measuring here? This is going to hurt, type of thing. And but I think overall you need those metrics to. It's comfortable not knowing what you don't know, but it's got to be scary as well, and that's the value of collecting metrics, in terms of, even if it's things on, how long are your unit tests taking to run? Why is the performance degraded over a certain amount of time? That sort of thing that we can keep an eye on with our software that we weren't able to do before without CI and CD.
Yeah, I would say automate those measurement points. Like, don't make it someone's job every Friday to go around and make an arbitrary decision on how good you are, depending on how late they were out the night before. Just automate those points, and they'll be in a daily dashboard. It becomes zero effort to do it. So it goes along with this whole, you can automate your code deployment. Start to kind of track those things that are going to show you that you're getting worse, or ideally show you that you're getting better, and help evangelize what you're trying to do. Because change isn't easy, right? I mean, that's the hardest part about any of this stuff we're doing is, hey, trust me, we're going to start to turn your world upside down, and it's going to be hard. Like, staying on course is easy, and change is difficult. There's no doubt about it. But it's rewarding, and it makes your company a lot faster.
Right, and it scales, and getting out a release is not going to depend on the flu sweeping through your release engineering team.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. And the good thing is that, again, thinking not just what we're doing today, but what are we going to be doing tomorrow, in a year, in 2 years. It's while it may work and be good enough for what our current product is or whatever it is, we will have to continue to support legacy processes for a long time. But we're also going to see that shift, and it's good. It's a positive shift. I think people get a little overwhelmed by the amount of products in the ecosystem. They get a little overwhelmed by where do I start, and that's kind of how I want to close out today, because I know that's a daunting part of the process. So I'll start with you, Kyle. If you're a developer who hasn't had exposure to CICD, what's a good read, what's a good learning resource, and who are the right community folks that they could reach out to, you think that would help them to sort of kickstart that journey into embracing CI/CD?
Yeah, I think the open source community is where you're going to want to start and turn. It's kind of where all this grew up, right? So, I mean, I think if you ask around, and you asked Sylvia and myself about our kind of tools of choice, they're all open source tools. They're kind of the best ones out there. The nice thing is there's a lot of larger companies and enterprises say, well, okay, we're okay with open source, but we still need an insurance policy around it. We still need support for it. The nice part is there's companies that are embracing the open source, building not so much their own commercial version, but they're adding features to it and offering support for them, and that gives that insurance policy, and it also helps the people that are learning it, because there's blogs and technical articles out there, and you can call a number, and you'll have some instruction guides and how-tos and things like that. So I mean, there's a couple great ones around the Jenkins world right now. I was talking to CloudBees at the last VMworld. They're doing some cool stuff in that area. So you've got a lot of choice. I think just getting out and going to a lot of meetups is another great place where I learn a lot. There's a lot of local meetups. You go to the DevOps meetups and the open, there's an AWS meetup. I've spoken at a few of them, but people are very willing to share their ideas and what they're doing in there. They're coming there to learn, and they're coming there to share their ideas. And in turn, they just want some, feedback back, or they would just want to leave knowing that it was worth their time. So, and there's mountains of information on the internet, but there's nothing like getting out there and talking to people that are in the trenches and doing the job, and they'll tell you the things not to do, and they'll also tell you some of the great things to do. But I love some of the stuff that's going on these days with companies is they're really putting a lot of their marketing effort into their blogs, and they realize that the blogs aren't they need to be really technical, and they need to be really helpful. And sure, you're evangelizing what you're doing, and you're telling people about your company, but it's getting away from the marketing side of it, and it's really getting to that keyword search. Someone's in Google trying to do something, they come across a really good blog, it tells them how to do it. It's not 100% relative to say you can only do it on our platform or not. It's really more around the software stack. And I think that's really setting some companies apart. Marketing's changing greatly, and it needs to really be relevant nowadays. We had a funny conversation before we started this around that, right? I mean, people aren't fools anymore. What you put out there is important, and being transparent and helpful is even more important.
Yeah, to your point, Sonatype actually put out about 50 different reference architectures for CI CICD in their blog. So one should definitely try different things, as simple as just stand up a Jenkins that's polling one of your SCM, your projects in SCM, and does a build, and then go to the blogs. As Kyle says, there are a lot of, most likely somebody's trying what you, or has tried what you are trying to do, and knows how to do it if you run into questions. And then definitely get up to the meetups, talk to people. But ultimately, you have to do. Just the fact that there are, over 50 reference architectures that Sonatype or people deem credible means that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and ultimately you have to put the tools together and do what's right for your team. And first thing I do is just dive in and try stuff, and then get out and talk to people.
That's the beauty part about iteration. It starts with testing the tools, and it's just that it's a fun approach. I've been lucky to be on the ops and at the architectural level to see it land on both dev, running an operations group, and feeding and taking that practice and applying it through desktop applications, through server applications, through general architecture. I tried to always introduce this idea that there's nothing wrong with failure. It's about this build, measure, learn loop, and always going back. My big recommended reads are always like, go pick up the Phoenix Project. It's a fun novel that kind of tells you about the story side of it. If you want to really dive in deep, you buy The Goal. That's the de facto sort of Bible of manufacturing, and then what drove a lot of the folks like Gene Kim and George Spafford and Kevin Bear, who is a friend of some folks who are here at VM Turbo, which is kind of fun. So with that, these are great places to start. What we'll do is we'll try and publish some links to the products we've talked about to help get people started. And as well, like I said, go to the meetups. There's lots of great ones. Don't be afraid to walk into a DevOps meetup and not be a DevOps shop, because you're going to go and you're going to find out that half the audience is just getting started as well. And there's always a freshman class. There's always a new batch of folks that have got new questions, so it's good to get amongst those people. So coming out of here, Sylvia, what's a good way for if people want to connect with you? Of course, they can watch your recent QCon talk. I don't know if that's published live or for out on video, anyways. But what's a good way for people to reach you if they wanted to ask some questions?
People can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and be happy to talk to them.
Excellent. And Kyle, the fact that I only tend to see you at foreign locations at conferences, even though we live in the same city a good chunk of the time, where do we find you?
Yeah, same thing. At Kyle Bassett on Twitter or on LinkedIn, or come to some meetups. I generally try to go to a lot of meetups. It's like a lot of this stuff's going on. It's about the people. It's about who you meet. So get out there and get out of your comfort zone.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's the beauty part. We've all been survivors of bringing these practices into different organizations, and it's fun to see. We're never done.
Absolutely.
The build, measure, learn loop continues every day. It's a continuous daily iterative approach. And I remember asking Nick Weaver, he was working at VMware at the time, now he's over at Intel, and I said, like, looking at the amount of work they were doing, he said, like, geez, it must be, like, how much stuff do you have in each of your sprints? And he says, the same amount as anybody else. We do the same, we have a 3-week sprint, this is what we do. You can only fit so many features out of the backlog into the build, and you go through that process and realize, like, yeah, it's the practice that's more important than the amount of flow, and visualizing that flow is a big part of it, and measurability and all those things, and CICD is a great way to do that. So thank you both for coming out today, and thank you to everybody for watching. We look forward to hopefully talking a bit more about this kind of a thing. And you both mentioned microservices, so watch out. You might find yourself on a microservices podcast shortly, because that's a big area that we're looking to expand. A lot of folks are asking about. So again, Kyle, thank you very much today.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. Great topic, man. Good job. Thanks.
All right, and for all the Green Circle folks, we are officially formal. We're going to launch every other week, so bi-weekly at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, barring any strange events such as hurricanes or reasons of why we can't do it. We may shift a little bit, but we've had such great feedback on the early editions that we had, and such a great audience that's building around it. We're very proud. So of course you can find me. I'm at Disco Posse on Twitter. You can find me at the Green Circle. Just Google out Green Circle. There's no other like it. So we're a great community, and it's not just around some of the stuff we do at VM Turbo, but it's about a community at large and great learnings that we've had across many different disciplines, and it's a great community. So again, with that, thank you very much, and we will see everybody in 2 weeks.
All right, take care.